I realized something last year that I wish I had understood 50 years ago, and once it settled in, I couldn't unfeel it. My name is Harold. I'm 80 years old, and the life I built, the one I was proud of, the one I defended, the one I sacrificed for, was never really mine. I want to tell you how that happens, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, in all the small moments where you say yes when something inside you wanted to say no, and you don't notice it at first. You think you're being responsible. You think you're being strong. You think the discomfort you feel is just the cost of doing what needs to be done. And by the time you realize the discomfort never went away, decades have passed and you're standing in a life that fits you the way a suit fits a man who borrowed it from someone else. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. My father was a civil engineer. Quiet man, serious man, not unkind, but not warm either. He had a particular way of looking at you when you said something he disagreed with. He didn't argue. He just looked at you with this expression that made you feel like you had said something slightly foolish. I learned very early to say things he agreed with. I learned to want things he approved of. Not because he forced me. He never forced me. He just made his approval feel like the most valuable thing in the room. And I spent the better part of my childhood trying to earn it. When I was 16, I told him I wanted to study literature. I'd been writing since I was 12. Stories mostly, some poetry when I was younger. The kind of things a teenage boy keeps hidden because he doesn't quite know what to do with them. I had a teacher, Mrs. Calloway, who told me I had a real gift. That was the word she used. Gift. I remember the feeling of her saying that. It was the first time an adult outside my family had looked at something I made and told me it mattered. I walked home that afternoon feeling like something had shifted, like I'd been handed a small piece of something true about myself. I told my father that evening at dinner. I said I was thinking about studying English, maybe writing, maybe becoming a teacher or an author. I wasn't entirely sure. I just knew it was the direction that felt right in my chest when I thought about the future. He listened. He didn't interrupt. And when I finished, he set down his fork and he looked at me with that expression and he said, "Harold, writers don't eat." And that was the end of the conversation. I want to be fair to him. He grew up during the Depression. He watched his own father lose everything. He had a framework for the world built entirely around security and survival. And inside that framework, what I was describing was not a career. It was a risk he didn't have the emotional vocabulary to support. I understand that now. But understanding it now doesn't change what happened then, which is that I folded. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I just quietly let go of the thing I wanted and picked up the thing that would make him nod instead of look at me that way. I enrolled in an engineering program the following fall. I was not a bad student. I worked hard. I always worked hard. That was never the problem. I graduated with decent marks and took a position at a firm in Cincinnati. I was 22 years old, and I told myself I was being practical. I told myself the writing had been a boyhood thing, a phase, something you outgrow the way you outgrow other adolescent notions. I told myself that so many times over the next few years that I almost believed it. Almost. There were signs, of course. There are always signs. I kept a journal through my 20s, not because anyone told me to, just because I needed somewhere to put the thoughts that had nowhere else to go. I would come home from work, eat dinner, sit down, and write for an hour before bed. Margaret, my wife, used to say I looked more alive after those hours than at any other point in the day. She noticed things like that. She was perceptive in a way I wasn't always ready to receive. I married Margaret when I was 26. She was a school teacher, patient and steady, and full of a warmth I had not grown up around. She loved me in a way that was uncomplicated, and I was grateful for it, though I don't think I told her that enough. We had 2 children, David and Susan. We bought a house. I was promoted 3 times in 8 years. My father came to visit when the second promotion came through, and he shook my hand and said, "I knew you'd do well, Harold." And I remember standing there feeling the thing I had always wanted to feel from him. That approval, that nod, and thinking it would feel bigger than it did. I thought it would feel like something finally arriving. Instead, it felt like very little. Like getting a gift you had asked for as a child and receiving it 20 years too late. The journal continued through my 30s. I started a story once, a long one, the kind I had always wanted to write. I worked on it for almost 2 years, nights and weekends, slowly and carefully. It was about a man returning to a town he grew up in after his father's death. I don't think it was a coincidence that I chose that subject. I got about 60 pages in before the project at work expanded and the overtime began, and I put the manuscript in the bottom drawer of my desk and told myself I would return to it when things settled down. Things did not settle down. They never settled down, and I never returned to it. I found those 60 pages last spring. I was cleaning out the desk in my study, the same desk I've had for 40 years, and there they were at the bottom of the deepest drawer, under old tax documents and instruction manuals for appliances I no longer own. I sat down on the floor right there, and I read them. All 60 pages. And I want to tell you what that was like because I don't think I have the words for it exactly, but I'll try. It wasn't that the writing was brilliant. I don't know if it was or wasn't. What struck me was the voice. There was a voice in those pages that was unmistakably mine. A version of mine I hadn't heard in decades. Curious, searching, a little uncertain, but genuinely alive in a way that I could not find anywhere in the 40 years of professional documents and formal correspondence I had produced since. It felt like finding a photograph of yourself as a young person and realizing that the expression on your face in that photograph is one you have not made since. Margaret passed in 2019. 51 years we were together. The house is quiet now, in a way I had not anticipated. I thought I knew what alone would feel like, and I was wrong. You don't know what a person's presence does for a space until the presence is gone. The particular sound of someone else in another room, the way another person's breathing changes the quality of silence. I didn't know how much I had been sustained by those things until they stopped. It was in that quiet, in the years after Margaret, that the realization I told you about at the beginning began to fully arrive. I would sit in the evenings, and I would think about my life the way you think about a book you've finished, trying to find the through line, trying to understand what it had been about. And what I kept returning to was the distance between what I had done and what I had wanted. Not the daily distance, the ordinary compromises every person makes, but a deeper, structural distance, a life oriented around the wrong center. I had spent 80 years being responsible, reliable, respected, and those are not nothing. I want to be careful not to say they are nothing because they are not. My children are good people. My work contributed things that mattered. My marriage was real and lasting and more loving than many. I'm not saying the life was wasted. I'm saying it was built to face the wrong direction, built to satisfy a standard that was handed to me before I was old enough to question it. And I accepted that standard, not because I examined it and agreed with it, but because I was 16 years old, and I wanted my father to stop looking at me that way. What I think about now in the evenings is not what I should have done differently. I am too old for that kind of thinking, and it helps nothing. What I think about is the boy who walked home from school one afternoon, feeling like he'd been handed a piece of something true about himself, and how quickly that piece got put away. I think about all the people who are walking around right now in lives that were designed by someone else's expectations and haven't yet had the chance to sit with the 60 pages they put in the bottom drawer. I think about how quietly it happens and how long it takes to see it clearly. If there is anything I would say to someone younger, not as advice, just as one person's account of how it went for me, it would be this: the things that feel true about you when you are very young, before the world starts insisting you be practical, before approval starts to matter more than honesty, those things are worth taking seriously. Not because they always lead somewhere workable, not because the world makes it easy, but because the alternative is what I'm describing to you now. A life that functions, that performs, that earns the nod, and still leaves you at 80 years old, sitting on the floor of your study holding 60 pages and wondering who you might have been if you'd been just a little braver at 16. My name is Harold. I am 80 years old, and I am still, in some quiet way, trying to find my way back to that afternoon.